17-year-old Jasmine Ortiz had been working 3 jobs simultaneously for 8 months: a morning shift at a bakery before school, a weekend position folding clothes at a retail store, and overnight hours twice a week at a 24-hour diner, all to help cover her mother's stage 3 kidney disease treatment after their insurance capped coverage on dialysis-related transportation costs. That alone ran $380 a month. She wasn't on Family Feud to have fun. She was there because a cousin had mentioned the show sometimes changed lives, and Jasmine, exhausted in a way most 17-year-olds never have to be, had nothing left to lose by trying. When Steve Harvey, mid-round, asked her a routine question about her weekend plans, Jasmine answered honestly without meaning to reveal anything, and the specific math she laid out, 68 hours a week between 3 jobs and a full course load, made Steve stop reaching for the next card entirely. The morning had begun like every taping day. Steve arrived at the Atlanta studio just before 9, running through his standard pre-show energy, joking with the crew about a scheduling mix-up with the sound check. Backstage, Jasmine sat beside her mother Elena in the green room, alongside their competing family for the day. The Franklin family, from South Carolina, a boisterous group of 5 who'd been rehearsing buzzer strategy for the better part of an hour. Jasmine kept her eyes on her phone throughout most of the pre-show briefing, not out of disinterest, but because she was mentally reviewing her shift schedule for the coming week, calculating whether the trip to Atlanta would cost her the overnight diner shift she desperately needed the following Tuesday. Steve did his usual round of greetings, complimenting Jasmine on a hoodie with her school's logo, unaware of the 68-hour weeks hiding behind her polite smile. But nobody in that studio knew what was coming. Elena Ortiz had been diagnosed with stage 3 chronic kidney disease 18 months earlier, a diagnosis that arrived after months of unexplained fatigue her doctor had initially, incorrectly, attributed to simple overwork as a single mother managing 2 jobs of her own. By the time specialists confirmed the diagnosis, Alana's kidney function had already declined enough to require dialysis 3 times a week, each session lasting 4 hours at a clinic located 22 miles from their apartment, a distance that became its own quiet crisis once Alana's declining energy made driving herself increasingly unsafe. Their insurance covered the dialysis treatment itself, but excluded transportation costs entirely, a gap that initially seemed manageable until the reality of 3 weekly round trips, totaling roughly 132 miles, began accumulating in gas costs, parking fees, and the occasional rideshare when Alana felt too unwell even to be driven by a neighbor. Jasmine's aunt had initially covered transportation, but her own work schedule made consistent availability impossible after the first 4 months, leaving Jasmine, despite not yet having her own car, to coordinate an increasingly complicated patchwork of rides from neighbors, church members, and eventually rideshare services that ate directly into whatever money she could earn. Elena had applied for a state transportation assistance program specific to dialysis patients, denied. The application citing insufficient documentation of medical necessity for specialized transport, despite letters from her nephrologist confirming she could not safely drive herself post-treatment, given documented post-dialysis fatigue and occasional dizziness. She appealed with additional documentation. Denied again. The program citing a funding cap reached earlier in the fiscal year that left her application queued for the following year's budget cycle, months away. A third avenue, a nonprofit specifically funding transportation for chronic illness patients, required proof of household income below a threshold Alana's modest wages, even reduced by her declining ability to work full hours, still exceeded by a narrow margin. Every application process seemed designed around a version of poverty more extreme than the one Elena and Jasmine actually lived in, a gap that qualified them for nothing while still leaving them unable to absorb the actual cost. Elena's dialysis clinic social worker had helped her file a fourth request through a hospital-affiliated charity fund, the closest option yet. Only to learn the fund had already allocated its full annual budget to earlier applicants by the time Elena's paperwork was processed, a timing issue nobody could have anticipated, given how recently her diagnosis had been finalized. The social worker, visibly frustrated on Elena's behalf during their final conversation about it, admitted she'd seen the same gap trap dozens of families in her years working with dialysis patients. Families who worked too much to qualify for assistance, but not enough to comfortably absorb costs insurance, simply didn't consider part of the treatment itself. What nobody at Jasmine's school fully understood, including teachers who noticed her occasional exhaustion in first period, was how completely she'd restructured her own life around covering that gap. She woke at 4:30 most mornings for her bakery shift, arrived at school by 7:45 having already worked 3 hours, attended a full course load while maintaining grades good enough to keep her eligibility for a college scholarship she was terrified of losing. Then worked her retail shift on weekends and the overnight diner shift twice monthly, timing her sleep in fragments that rarely added up to more than 5 hours on the days she worked overnight. She told her school counselor, when gently asked about her tired eyes, that she'd just been staying up doing homework. She told her closest friend that things were busy but manageable. She told her mother nearly every single day, "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry about me," a phrase Elena had started to recognize, with growing guilt, as something closer to a rehearsed deflection than an honest update. The daily cost of carrying this burden showed up in specific, measurable ways. Jasmine had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her pediatrician noting a 9-pound drop over 6 months during a routine physical that Alana had insisted on scheduling, despite Jasmine's protests that she didn't have time. She'd stopped participating in the school's debate club, an activity she'd loved and excelled at, simply because the after-school meeting time conflicted directly with her retail shift. She'd also quietly declined 2 separate college recruiting visits from out-of-state programs specifically interested in her academic record, unable to justify time away from her jobs even for opportunities that might have shaped her entire future. A sacrifice she made without telling her mother, who Jasmine feared would blame herself entirely if she knew the full extent of what her daughter was giving up. Jasmine kept a small spreadsheet on her phone tracking every dollar earned against every dollar the transportation costs consumed, a habit that gave her a strange, exhausting sense of control over a situation that otherwise felt entirely outside her hands. Some weeks the math worked out with a small cushion. Other weeks, particularly when Alana's dialysis schedule required an unexpected rideshare due to a canceled ride from a neighbor, Jasmine found herself picking up an extra overnight shift at the diner on short notice, arriving at school the next morning running on almost no sleep at all, surviving on the bakery's day-old pastries she was allowed to take home rather than a proper breakfast. One evening, about 5 months before the Family Feud taping, Alina had noticed Jasmine asleep at the kitchen table, homework still open in front of her, an energy drink can empty beside her elbow. Alina had gently woken her, and Jasmine, disoriented and exhausted, had said, without fully registering the words leaving her mouth, "I just need us to make it, Mom. I just need us to make it." Alina had to step into the bathroom to cry where her daughter wouldn't see, understanding fully, for the first time, the scale of what Jasmine had quietly taken on to keep their household functioning. The specific reason Jasmine applied for Family Feud came from her cousin, who'd seen a segment months earlier about a family receiving unexpected help after sharing their story on the show. Jasmine filled out the application during a rare 15-minute break at the diner, mentioning her mother's illness and their transportation gap briefly in the additional notes section, expecting nothing to come of it. The callback arrived 5 weeks later, and Jasmine nearly declined, worried about losing a full weekend of pay for the trip, before her manager at the bakery, learning the reason, insisted she go and covered her shift himself. The taping moved through its early rounds with typical rhythm, the Franklin family energetic and confident. Jasmine and Elena a little more reserved but clearly warm with the audience. During a lighter round, Steve asked contestants a simple survey question about weekend activities, the kind of question built for easy, relatable answers. Jasmine, next in line, answered honestly and without any intention of revealing more than the question asked. "Honestly, I don't really have weekend activities," she said. "I work retail Saturdays and Sundays, plus my bakery shift before school on weekdays, plus the diner overnight twice a month. It's about 68 hours most weeks on top of school." The studio fell completely silent. Steve, mid-motion reaching for the next card, stopped entirely. He looked at Jasmine, then did the math out loud, almost to himself, before looking back at her. 68 hours. On top of a full school schedule. Jasmine nodded, slightly embarrassed by the sudden attention, unsure why the number seemed to have landed so heavily. Elena, standing beside her daughter, had gone very still, her eyes filling as she realized her daughter had just said out loud, in front of 200 strangers, the full scope of something Jasmine had spent months minimizing at home. Steve set the cards down slowly. "Why, baby? Why are you working that much at 17? Jasmine hesitated, glancing at her mother, then answered quietly. "My mom's on dialysis. Insurance doesn't cover the rides there, and it's like $400 a month just in gas and ride shares. So I work to cover it." 300 people stopped breathing at the same moment. Elena broke down completely, no longer able to hold back the tears she'd been fighting all day. But Steve wasn't done. He walked over to a stage manager. "Stop everything," he said. "This has never happened in the 45-year history of this show, and I am not moving past it like it's just another round." A producer signaled for a break, and Steve waved him off. "No network approval," he said. "This is me, Steve Harvey, and we are stopping the game right now." He knelt down in front of Jasmine and Elena both. "Let me tell you something," he said, his voice thick. "I know what it is to watch somebody you love suffer and feel like the only thing you can do is work yourself into the ground trying to fix it. My own mother carried weight like that for our family when I was young. Weight I didn't fully understand until I was grown myself. And I made a promise a long time ago that if I ever had the ability to lift that kind of weight off somebody, I would do it without hesitation." He looked directly at Jasmine. "You should not be working 68 hours a week at 17. That's not sacrifice, baby. That's a system failing your family. And today, it stops." He wasn't finished. Steve pulled out his phone right there on the stage, something no host does mid-taping, and called a contact at a patient transportation assistance foundation he'd worked with previously. "I need a full year of guaranteed medical transportation covered for a dialysis patient named Elena Ortiz. Starting immediately," he said into the phone, loud enough for the front rows to hear every word. "And I want a full college scholarship fund established for her daughter Jasmine. Enough that she can quit at least 2 of her 3 jobs today." He hung up before waiting for a response, certain of the answer. He turned to face the cameras directly. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home," he said. "A 17-year-old girl is working nearly 70 hours a week because a system decided medical transportation wasn't essential enough to cover. That is not a personal failure. That is a policy failure, and it is costing kids their childhoods." Elena was sobbing now, holding Jasmine tightly, and dozens in the audience were crying as well. And then he did something no one expected, even his own producers. He announced that both families, the Ortizes and the Franklins, would split the full fast money prize regardless of outcome. The Franklin family's eldest daughter crossed the stage without hesitation, embracing Jasmine and telling her that no 17-year-old should be carrying what she'd been carrying alone. 3 months after the taping, Jasmine had quit both her retail and diner jobs, keeping only her bakery shift because she said she genuinely enjoyed the early mornings and the owner who'd always been kind to her. She'd rejoined debate club and accepted, at Steve's foundation's specific encouragement, one of the college recruiting visits she'd previously declined, an experience she described afterward as the first time in over a year she'd been able to think about her own future without immediately calculating how it might affect her mother's care. When the episode aired 6 weeks after taping, it crossed 285 million views across platforms within the first 10 days, and the hashtag 68 hours trended worldwide for a full week, prompting several state legislators to cite the transportation coverage gap directly in proposed healthcare policy amendments aimed at closing exactly the kind of eligibility gap that had denied Alana assistance. 3 separate times. A year after the taping, Alina's transportation costs remained fully covered, and Jasmine had committed to a state university with a substantial portion of tuition covered by the scholarship fund established in her name. Choosing a program in social work specifically because, she said, she wanted to help other families navigate the kind of bureaucratic gaps that had nearly cost her own family everything. Today, the 68 Hours Foundation, named for the exact number Jasmine gave on stage, has provided medical transportation assistance to over 9,900 dialysis and chronic illness patients nationwide whose insurance excluded transportation coverage, and to date has distributed $24 million toward that mission, with a dedicated fast-track review process specifically designed to catch families who fall between standard income thresholds, the way Elena repeatedly had. Jasmine still works her bakery shift most mornings before school, though now it's a choice rather than a necessity. Something she said has changed the entire feeling of the work itself. She no longer keeps the spreadsheet tracking every dollar against the transportation costs, deleting it from her phone the week Steve's foundation confirmed the year of coverage. A small digital deletion, she said, felt disproportionately significant given everything that number had once represented. In a later interview, Steve said the number 68 had stayed with him longer than almost any detail he'd heard on stage in years. "That's not a part-time job," he said. "That's closer to 2 full-time jobs stacked on top of high school," and she said it like it was just an ordinary fact about her life. "That's the part that got me." Alina still sends updates to Steve's team every few months, and Jasmine recently mailed a photo of her college acceptance letter directly to his office, along with a short note thanking him for a version of her senior year she said she never thought she'd get to have. What Jasmine's honest, unguarded answer revealed to a stunned studio, and to millions watching afterward, wasn't really about one family's medical bills alone. It was a reminder that the quiet, invisible sacrifices teenagers make for the people they love rarely announce themselves loudly, and that sometimes it takes a simple, offhand question to reveal just how much weight a child has been carrying without anyone thinking to ask. If this story about a teenager's quiet sacrifice moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that sometimes one act of compassion is enough to change everything. Do you know a family in a situation like this? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more moments that restore your faith in humanity.